All right, so good morning and welcome. Perfect words for you. My name is Bhuvan Unhelkar, and thank you guys for organizing the research cafe and the ongoing research sharing on this campus. And I and Dr. Sunita Ladwig over there, we had the privilege of meeting Dr. Kwiat, mispronouncing, forgive me. Once we met and we started chatting, it was about a month ago, a bit more than a month, and we found that he has a fantastic background, which is not only professional but quite a bit research oriented, and we thought that we will invite him over here. So luckily it has happened. I know there is a bit of a clash with other presentations, so I have already updated Kevin that some people might leave, so he's okay with that. So Kevin is a co-founder and principal technology consultant of Caesar Group. He's a former Air Force engineer. The Caesar Group, formed by the Air Force engineer, works alongside an array of business and organizations, from startups to multinational firms, to deliver government-funded research from the Air Force and public and private universities to the forefront of the industry. And that was one of the key attractions for us inviting Kevin. Machine learning, cybersecurity, nanotechnologies, and drone enabling technologies are amongst the many that have been developed to support government or university objectives. And there are quite a few other interesting things, but I'm going to leave it up to Kevin. If I'm missing out on the important bit, please feel free to share that with us. And here you have professors, researchers, teachers that we have been telling you about. So welcome to our campus.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming. So the technical part of my talk is work that the Air Force has done in assured cloud computing using game theory. And as Bhuvan had mentioned, I'm with the Caesar Group, and so the Caesar Group is about technology transfer. So I'm going to give a bit of a preamble to the technical talk, just for the sake of letting you know why I'm here. So this the Caesar Group is leveraging government-funded academic research in business, and so the government part stems from this organization called Air Force Research Laboratory, AFRL for short. And I'm formerly employed with Air Force Research Laboratory. I was there for over 34 years. They're being in Rome, New York. That's the Center for Air Force's Research and Information Technology. And that's why we call our group the Caesar Group. You can see the association between Caesar and Rome. This is the other Rome. This is the one in Rome, New York. And but before retiring, a group of us who were at the doorstep of launching new careers came to the realization that the Air Force's research investment in information technology had reached over $1 billion a year. And much of that was going into academic research as well as industry research. Some, of course, was enclosed to the government, especially that being classified work. So we approached the Department of Commerce with the idea that there is a large segment of this technology investment that can be directed towards what's called dual use technology. That is, technology that can benefit not just the government objectives, but also be put into the arena of commercialization. So the Department of Commerce awarded us a grant, partly because of our background. And here are some of the numbers. Our group has over 100 years experience, and over those years we've generated over $40 million of investment into information technology, primarily in academic research, because that's research that is unclassified, therefore it's more apt to be put into the commercial arena. And also we are technologists, so we have intellectual property that the government has fostered with the 9 patents. And perhaps most importantly is the ground base that we created over those years with our mentoring, our ability to guide people towards achieving their goals in this world of fast-paced technology. And so the vision that we created with the Caesar Group was to again perform technology transfer. But when the grant came back, the Department of Commerce broadened our objectives. They said, well, don't just look at AFRL technology per se, but look at technology that can be transitory, or transitive, I should say. That if the Air Force is investing in academics, then look at the academic world and see what related technologies can be commercialized as well. So they really broadened our scope. And so their goal again was to say, what can we do with using the baseline of AFRL, investment in IT, to create a new surge in commercialization. So our services, again, we're primarily technologists. So the technology services we offer are to help the people who are looking at commercialization understand what the technology does. Okay, so we are more about the how, and they can deal with the what. And so we work to make that transition happen. But part of the motivation, part of the incentives to working with us is that we help usher in SBIR grants. SBIR being Small Innovative Research Grants that businesses can apply for. Now, SBIRs, for the first, they're in phases. The first phase are up to $150,000 for 6 months, but then after that, phase 2 years up to $1 million. So these are this is one of the incentives that we apply, and the caveat is that we're trying to get entrepreneurs to look at AFRL technology and base their grant proposals on that IP, that intellectual property that the AFRL has provided. And then finally, I alluded to the connections that we formed over the years, and this is a big part of our work. We don't have a budget to advertise. Our grant does not allow us, that allows us, to do the function that we perform, but we don't advertise. So we reach out, and this is one of the opportunities I was happy to undertake to make those foster those connections. All right, so this has already been mentioned. The scope of AFRL technologies is rather wide. These are some of the most in-demand technologies we're finding, and so these are at the forefront of where people want to go in moving technology from the laboratory into the commercial marketplace. So my talk will be exemplified by cybersecurity. This is one of the examples that I decided to provide. So finally, our advantage then is kind of anchored in our knowledge. Again, some of the technologies are not for the faint of heart. So when we deal with young entrepreneurs, maybe MBA students, it can be rather intimidating. So we try to make that passage smooth in going from looking at some IP that can be very esoteric, but distilling it down into a form of a business plan that can be implemented. And then not to be belittled the Air Force Research Laboratory, but we had known how to navigate through the bureaucracy. Taking intellectual property that the Air Force has created and getting it into an executable form takes some effort, and we know how to do that. We've done it, and so that's why I mentioned no bureaucracy, because we kind of we insulate, I guess, our clients from it. And finally, that gives us a chance to a boutique approach. We deal with people who are, again, young, aspiring entrepreneurs, to people who are established already in business. So we tailor our approach based on their backgrounds. So these are some of the successes we've had. We have 3 SBIR applications in the works. And some of those have we've since spawned patent applications. Again, all these by the way, those patent applications are all coming from academia, by the way. Our contacts in academia that have looked at their technology a little closer and said, hey, let's apply for a patent. And AFRL is supporting it. We look at business concepts. The entrepreneurs and are participating in our program is continuing. And perhaps our most greatest interest is that AFRL, we're sort of like talent scouts for the Air Force Research Laboratory. The Air Force Research Laboratory has a very vibrant connection to academia. They have a summer faculty program which has this past summer, over 60 summer faculty coming to the laboratory in Rome. And many of them bring interns with them. So you might be surprised that roughly 10% of those faculty come from Florida, represented by University of Florida, University of Central Florida, University of South Florida, Florida Gulf Coast University, Florida Atlantic University, and Florida International University. So apparently some are inclined to escape the summer heat and go up to upstate New York for 8 to 10 weeks. So, and then there are part of the incentives for them to do that. There are research grants that stem from these faculty stays that they have to apply for. And so, I always tell anyone who, you're invited to join in, and hope to see you up here sometime soon. Well, that's, we can talk if you wish in further detail. But now, without further ado, I will begin my technical part of the talk, which is dealing with cloud computing. So the title is Assured Cloud Computing Using Game Theory, or another subtitle I thought perhaps would have been more appropriate, would have been Security-Aware Virtual Machine Allocation in the Cloud, a game theoretic approach. Because that's really what we're looking at here, is how to do the allocation of virtual machines. So my talk will touch upon all of these things, and perhaps foremost is the idea of public cloud computing. You might wonder, why is the Air Force, of all people, interested in public cloud computing? I mean, you think they'd be very security conscious and want to have private clouds. But you might be surprised, over 80% of the Air Force, or actually the DoD's network traffic travels over commercial lines. So they're not as insulated as you might think. So they're very much interested in leveraging the commercial world's offering of public cloud computing. And of course, there are challenges that ensue, and we'll talk about game theory and then the details that stem from that. Well, the cloud. Okay, so there it is, an atmospheric phenomenon, and it looks rather pleasant, but in fact, there can be some hidden aspects to it, and that's really what the idea of this picture is. Something can be lurking in the cloud that is perhaps harmful, but some of the attributes that make cloud computing what it is. You see that there's this, making it really the ubiquitous part of it is the on-demand service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, measured service. These are all things that make it advantageous from owning their own computing resources and saying, no, I'm going to let someone else handle all this infrastructure and just do it as kind of like a utility. Think of cloud computing as a utility, like we turn on the water, or we turn on power for the air conditioning. They want to make computing a utility, just on demand. When you need it, it's there. So, of course, there are benefits that emerge, but there's no such thing as a idealistic world, I would suppose, and so accompanying those benefits are these risks. And the most compelling risk that the Air Force was looking at was this idea of interdependency. Because the cloud is an open thing. Anyone can go in a public cloud, provided they have they meet the ability to buy in. But there's no screening of who gets in and who does not. So you might think of it as a possibility that you buy into a real estate investment, but then suddenly not realizing who your neighbors are going to be. Okay, and that could be make it an adverse endeavor. So That's what interdependency means. You're taking on some risks that you hadn't thought of before. Well, so I alluded to this before. The interdependency is from who else is in the cloud, because the cloud is a shared resource, and they are not necessarily well partitioned. For example, these type of resources, the first level, the last level cache, memory, bandwidth, I/O buffers, and so forth. These are things these are the underlying infrastructure that is shared amongst all the cloud users. And so these resources being shared are the basis oftentimes for what's called cross-site channel attacks. And it's not fictitious. These are a couple of examples of actual attacks that manifested in the cloud. And perhaps more recently, there's the Spectre attack that has affected data centers of cloud providers, and that has caused them to take another hard look at what the interdependency means amongst their users. So the data supports the idea that interdependency is not something that can be taken lightly. So the approach that I'm calling it our approach. This is actually AFRL's approach. They don't want to remove the attractive attribute of the public cloud. You know, come one, come all. Small organizations should be joining in as well. And so they want to retain that attribute. But then that ushers in the cross-channel attack problem that is very vexing at the moment. And so the objective is to use an allocation mechanism that hadn't been looked at before. People looked at that as allocation of users into the cloud. How are these resources being assigned to various users? So the approach was to apply game theory, and the underlying objective, really the core of it, was the Nash equilibrium as part of the outcome of the allocation method. Now, Nash equilibrium, equilibrium is of course a balancing, in this case a balancing of risk. And the Nash part is named after John Nash, the mathematician, who was in the movie The Beautiful Mind. We have heard that. That's the mathematician there. And so he won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his proof that all games have to have an equilibrium. And it was an astounding proof. But again, it was only an existence proof. It proved the existence of these equilibriums. It doesn't say how to get them. So that's one of the things that we have to do as engineers, find it. And so this is the iterative approach to finding the Nash equilibrium in this scheme of allocating virtual machines or users to the cloud. So identify the players, strategies, the payoffs, and then gather information. And then given the payoff structure and the strategies that are determined, find the Nash equilibrium, and then continue monitoring that equilibrium. So when deviations occur, new players enter the arena, then this iterative approach restarts over again. So that was the application of game theory. But a little bit more about the Nash equilibrium. Since every game has one, either in what's called the pure form or the mixed form. Pure form means that it's a fixed strategy that is maintained, whereas the mixed strategy is there's a probabilistic application of the strategy. So it's not fixed. Now the Nash equilibrium, NE here, why is it compelling? It's compelling because once it's obtained, no player has any motivation to deviate from their current strategy. And this is important because it says that this constant churning of wanting to rebalance the allocations of virtual machine of users to the cloud ceases. It becomes a stable state, and there is, so we can use that as a risk balancer, you know, and I'll go into that momentarily. Well, so the Nash equilibrium security game has these favorable objectives: predict the attacker strategy and allocate our resources. And that's what I've been driving at up to now, how these resources can be allocated such that the Nash equilibrium is achieved. And so the most compelling part of this is that we can now make some mathematical based decisions about how cybersecurity is applied. Okay, so one of the mantras, you might say, at Air Force Research Laboratory is what we need are not more industry tools, but mathematics. That was kind of what spurred this work. So here's a system model. So you can think of here's the hardware, you know, the caches, the CPUs and so forth, and reside upon them the things called the hypervisors, which kind of orchestrate the operation of these virtual machines that are user created. And so these are the software that runs on these hypervisors, and you see these virtual machines come from different users. And so the hypervisor becomes a shared resource. And we have the cross-channel attack emerges here. The compromised hypervisor can make all users vulnerable. So an attack successfully here can be migrated over to any machine, on any virtual machine that is on the hypervisor. So that is where the cross-channel attack stems from. So a bad neighbor, of which you have absolutely no knowledge of, the cloud providers are not going to provide you with that kind of knowledge. Can be used at a vulnerable point to launch attacks that, if they stem from the hypervisor, make you powerless to defend against it. Okay, so if you were thinking of games as being a colorful kind of video game kind of a thing, I'm sorry. This is what a game looks like. It's in a matrix form, so I'm not going to dwell into the nitty-gritty details, but just a little bit to give you some flavor. All right, so this is a 3-player game. We have an attacker and 3 users. User 2, and unseen here is the user can attack user 1, can attack user 2, and it can attack user 3. Now this is like the initial condition. So the idea here is we have 2 hypervisors, and user 1 is assigned to hypervisor 1, and user 3 is assigned to hypervisor 2. And the basis of that decision is that users on hypervisor 1 don't invest well in their security. Whereas hypervisor 2 hosts users that are kind of fixated on their security. So user 2 is kind of thinking, well, what should I do? Okay, he's kind of uncertain at this time. So again, this is a base case. So user 2, looking at this, says, okay, well, let's take a look at user 2's. If you were to go to investing in security on hypervisor 2, then the payoff to the attacker, well, if you look at these variables here, the payoff can be the probability of successfully attacking that and the loss potential of user 2. Plus, now here the pi is an important factor. It's the probability of the hypervisor compromise giving the cross-channel attack possibility. And so with that, then the user 3 can lose his potential. And of course, that's all multiplied by the probability of that attack being.
Kevin, a quick one.
Yes.
The user to hypervisor mapping, isn't that dynamic?
Well, it's dynamic in the sense that it's governed by an algorithm.
Right, because
user 2 is coming it's proposing to use the cloud. And now the cloud provider has an opportunity to decide whether or not, how the allocation method should be.
because see, when you mentioned that the attacker can plan in such a way as to look at the most vulnerable user,
Right.
depending on which hypervisor that user is sitting on. But that user to hypervisor, I thought, is continuously changing.
Well, that's true. The allocation methods I mean, as more users come in, the allocation can be performed.
Mhm.
So is that,
Okay, okay, we'll chat.
okay?
We'll
Well,
chat later.
Okay, maybe we can revisit that.
See you around.
Okay. All right, so, so the game model is presented in this way, and the, so then we churn away. We search for the Nash equilibria. And so here there are several of them, and they're based on the ranges of the payoff structure. Well, payoff and loss. So they go together. And so, you know, these are found. And how are they used? Well, okay, so maybe this may touch upon your question. So for these parameters, user 2 has a decision to make. Okay, so based on his loss potential, and so here user 2 assigns their strategy in a fixed sense. They're not going to. This is what the user 2 has to allocate to based on a fixed to achieve the next equilibrium. But at a certain loss potential, then it becomes a mixed. So the user 2 does some allocation based on a probability. One could go the other, but it's a probabilistic decision. It's not fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Again, so that's called a mixed equilibrium. So you see that it's fixed initially and then becomes mixed based on how that loss potential makes user 2's loss potential.
So will this apply to something like AWS offering cloud services to end users like me? Because AWS will spawn off new hypervisors and new resources if I have gone for that elastic service
Mm-hmm.
of Amazon as an example, or Azure or any other cloud. So will this apply to those kind of offerings as well, or?
Yes, I believe your question is stemming from the idea that we're looking at a real base case here. With just 3 users. Of course, you know, this has to be expanded out to many, and many hypervisors too. So the model, this is simply the starting point.
I guess, yeah, that's fine. I guess what I'm asking is, there's nothing that the end user can do, even if they understand the theory. It is the service provider who has to secure their services that can utilize your theory.
Well, but some of this is seeded. Some of the service providers' actions are seeded by what the users do. The users they're independent, and they may decide that my application is, I don't care. It's just I don't care. I'm not going to invest in securing it.
Mm-hmm.
It could be just some thing for storing photos or something like that. I mean, privacy. Nothing is of interest for that person to secure their virtual machine. Whereas others, their application running on their virtual machine, securing is very concerned. So they'll invest in security a priori.
Mm-hmm.
So these decisions are made prior to these users entering into the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're banking on the cloud not allowing for the cross-channel attacks.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm asking, that preventing cross-channel attacks
Yeah.
will be done by whom? By the users or the service providers?
The service provider.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Okay, good. We nailed it. All right. So, okay. So then let's see. But other things governing this is good. Their investment in security is a variable called E, and so as their expense, the expense for them to secure their assets themselves, that strategy changes as that increases as well. So again, this is something the cloud provider will know a priori. Whether this application is going to be secure or not. That's something they can determine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm looking at my time. I don't want to deprive you of your questions. And so remember that variable pi, which I said was the probability of a cross-channel attack being successful. So you see here that as the probability of pi increases, why this smoothness here is important. It says that the strategy doesn't change as pi changes. So in other words, this is independent of the vulnerabilities of the infrastructure of this game. This game is really driven by the players. So that's the importance of this chart here. That for all the range of pi, there is no strategy change. It's all governed by the players, which is the attacker and the users and the club. Okay, so that was the base case. Now for just really quickly, if I may, we want to just give you a flavor for how this model is extended. And so the important part is that when you start having users entering into the cloud, it's a very dynamic situation. And there's going to be one user who will sit on the threshold between investing in security and non-investing, because all the users' expected loss magnitudes will balance out. And so finding that user that causes the attacker to flip their preferences is important. And so here we see that for these 10, in this case the simulation had 10 virtual machines to be allocated. It shows that here's the loss potentials. Or actually, the attacker payoff is another way to look at it. And it says that the crossover is just beyond 3. So at 4 is the pivotal user that trusts the attacker to change the preferences. And this means that in this more dynamic situation, the attacker becomes indifferent to which hypervisor to attack. And the main point is that attacker indifference in cybersecurity can make a big difference. And why is that? Because you see other allocation methods. You can see the externality, that is the loss potential from this possible cross-channel attack, varies greatly. Here we have, if we just pull all users on the non-secure, or all users on hypervisor 1, which means they're not investing in their security, the loss potential is very high. But if we're fixated on security, it goes down. If we just randomly assign equal, then the loss potential is there. Randomly, the loss potential is there. But here you see the mixed Nash equilibrium. And it makes it compelling because it adds yet another layer of defense that cloud providers can provide. That is to keep the attacker off balance, so he does not become too attentive to any one particular target. So it becomes yet another layer of defense that's possible that hadn't been seen before. So outcomes. Well, this particular game theory, this method was in this game theory book on game theory for security and risk management. And then the Air Force then said, okay, well, let's look at how we can expand on this possibility of commercialization. So they pursued and were awarded this patent on this allocation method. Now to bring it more to the forefront of potential adopters of this technology, I was co-editor on a book on assured cloud computing that was the capstone of this Air Force Research Laboratory's multi-million-dollar funded university grant to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign on the Center of Excellence in Cloud Computing. This was the capstone of that endeavor, and I was one of the co-editors of the book. And this blurb is from the publishers. So the point is that the Air Force is very interested in how to make this technology available to someone who can adopt it and bring it into the commercial arena. So, all right, now I'm coming to the conclusion of my talk, and I thought, how can I end this? And I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm talking about the Air Force, and I've talked about games, so there. So there's the Air Force has put out, the Air Force features a monopoly, a game, but it's about business too, right? And so that the game, however, the Air Force, they declared that this the Air Force Research Laboratory was deserving of space on that board, okay? And so with the Caesar Group, we're asking you to consider becoming a player too. And that concludes the talk. Thank you.
Oh, very nice.
Yes?
My understanding was that one basic assumption for this Nash equilibrium was if the attacker or even the users have a steady behavior, in other words, they would behave pretty much the same. But what if they have an adaptive behavior or even a variable behavior?
Right. Well, see, that's where the monitoring part of that cycle that I showed, things are not going to remain, and all the variables are not going to remain fixed such that the equilibrium is going to remain. So once those variables change, then we have to reinitiate that cycle.
So it has to be reinitiated every
Right.
time.
So that would imply a redistributing or a reallocation of the virtual machines. That's correct.
So that means the cycle will not, it's possible the cycle is not completed and it's been reinitiated.
Right. Of course, yes, because users will arrive at the cloud's doorstep, but also users will depart as well. Again, it's expandable, it's elastic, so the resources are allocated and then deallocated, so it changes.
Yeah.
But it's not a, it doesn't, by the way, this method, Booz Allen Hamilton, a contractor, developed a simulator for this. So we were able to simulate how this would happen in real life. And it shows that it's not going to be it's not going to affect the cloud provider's performance. Okay. That's one of the key outcomes. So it's negligible impact.
Is there a limit on the resource usage, amount of resources available?
For this method?
Uh-huh.
Again, it was with a negligible outcome to determine how much CPU cycles were devoted towards computing these Nash equilibrium. It was negligible in performance. Again, you're right, there was a cost-benefit analysis that was performed. And the cost to the providers is not a deterrent for them to adopt this method. So what you may think about is, there are other allocation methods too. They allocate based on power. They allocate, data centers, huge electricity bills. So, they have to allocate virtual machines so that, power is conserved. So this method has to be integrated with other established methods for allocating virtual machines as well.
Right.
So this is not going to stand in isolation.
Right.
Is there a consideration to creation of dummy virtual machines to throw off the attackers or to lure them away from, you mentioned a sentence in your talk where you said if the attackers are going to attack in a random manner, then it has an impact, a very, very good impact on security because they don't know which VM they are attacking.
Right.
So have the service providers considered creation of dummy virtual machines with no user allocation or dummy user allocation